thought as much. Will you please give me a straight answer to this? Has Mrs. Linda been given a job at the bank?
I do not know how you can have the face to interrogate me like this, Mr. Krogstad. You are, after all, now one of my husband's subordinates. However, since you ask, I might as well tell you. Mrs. Linda has been given a job there, on my recommendation. Now you know.
So I guessed right.
I do think I have a little bit of influence, you know. So, Mr. Krogstad, when one finds oneself in a subordinate position, one should be careful not to offend anyone with influence.
Influence?
Exactly.
I wonder if you'd be kind enough to use your influence on my behalf.
What do you mean?
Would you be kind enough to make sure that I keep my subordinate position at the bank?
Well, I don't understand. Why should anyone want to take it from me?
There's no reason to pretend you don't know anything about it. I realize it can't be very pleasant for your friend to be thrown together with me. And now I realize who's responsible for having me out.
Are you sure you're...
There's still time to stop it. I suggest you use that influence to do something about it.
Well, I don't have any influence, really.
You just said...
I know, but that was different. You can't possibly think I have that much influence over my husband.
I know your husband. We were students together. I know he's the manager of a bank, but I don't think you'll find His Highness any more resolute than any other
I'm going
husband.
to insult my husband. I shall have to ask you to leave.
Spirit.
I am not afraid of you anymore. By the new year, this whole thing will be behind me.
Now listen to me, Mrs. Helmer. If necessary, I'm prepared to fight for my little job as if I were fighting for my life.
Apparently.
A few years ago, I made a mistake.
Did you hear something about that?
I was never brought to trial for it, but from then on, for me, all roads were blocked. You know what business I've been into then? I had to do something, and I don't think I've been as bad as many of them. But now I've got to put all of that behind me. My sons are growing up. I've got to win back as much public respectability as I can for their sake. For me, that job was the first step on that ladder. And now your husband wants to kick me back again, down into the mud.
But for God's sake, Mr. Krogstad, it is not in my power to help you.
You only say that because you don't want to help me. But I have the means to force you.
You are not going to tell my husband I owe you money.
Suppose I do.
Well, that would be a wicked thing to do. That secret is my pride and my happiness. If he were to find out about it from you in such a crude and ugly way, it would put me in the most frightfully unpleasant position.
Unpleasant? Is that all?
Go ahead and do it. It will be the worst for you, and then my husband will see how vicious you are, and you are bound to lose your job.
I asked you if it was a bit of domestic unpleasantness that you were afraid of.
If my husband does find out, he will pay whatever is outstanding at once, and then we will have nothing more to do with you.
Mrs. Helmer, you obviously have a very poor memory, or you have no clue about business.
What do you mean?
When your husband was ill, you came to me to borrow 4,800 kroner.
You were the only one I knew of.
I promised to raise the money for you.
Yes, which you did.
I promised to raise the money for you in return for an IOU, which I drew up.
And which I signed.
That's right, but I left the date blank so that your father could sign and date it. Do you remember?
I think so, yes.
Yes, that must have been a very difficult time for you, Mrs. Helmer.
It was.
I believe your father was ill.
He was dying.
And did die shortly afterwards. Tell me, Mrs. Helmer, do you remember what day your father died?
Papa died on the 29th of September.
That's right. I've made some inquiries. And that's what brings us to the unusual feature of this case, Mrs. Helmer. A feature which I'm afraid I'm at a loss to explain.
Usual feature.
Yes, your father dated this contract 3 days after he died. Your father died on September the 29th. Now look here. He's dated his signature October the 2nd. That is rather unusual, isn't it? Isn't easy to explain, is it, Mrs. Helmer? I suppose it is genuine. Your father really did sign here, didn't he?
No, he didn't. I did.
Mrs. Helmer, you realize that's a very dangerous confession.
Ah, you'll get your money.
Why didn't you send your father this contract?
I couldn't. Father was so ill, if I had asked for his signature, I would have had to have told him I needed it. I couldn't possibly tell him that my husband's life was in danger. It was impossible.
Then you would have done better to cancel your trip.
I couldn't. That trip saved my husband's life. I could possibly cancel it.
But you were cheating me, or did that never occur
I
to
couldn't
you?
afford to worry about things like that. I didn't care about you. I hated you for making all those ruthless conditions when you knew how dangerously ill my husband was.
Mrs. Helmer, you obviously have no clear idea what you're guilty of. I can assure you that what I did was no more and no worse than that, and it totally destroyed my position in society.
What you did. Are you trying to tell me you took any risk to save your wife's life?
The law is not interested in motives.
Well, then the law is useless. useless.
Useless or not, if I were to present this contract in a court, you would be condemned by the law.
I don't believe it. You mean to tell me that a daughter isn't allowed to spare her father and save a husband's life? I don't believe it. I don't know much about the law, but oh, I know that there must be provision somewhere for that kind of situation, and if you don't know about them, then all I can say is you must be a pretty useless lawyer, Mr. Krogstad.
That's as may be. But when it comes to business, the kind of business that we're involved in, take my word for it, I know what I'm talking about. Now you do what you like, but I'm telling you one thing. If I'm to be thrown out again, you're coming with me.
He's just trying to scare me. I'm not that stupid. It's impossible.
Mommy? The stranger gone now, Mommy?
Yes, the stranger's gone, but you are not to tell anybody there was a stranger here, not even Papa, do you understand?
Yes, Mommy. Are you going to play a game now? Mommy, you promised.
I have so much to do now. Just go in and see them.
But Mommy, you
That's
promised.
No. Helene, bring in the Christmas tree.
Where shall I put it, Dad?
On the table.
Is there anything else that needs to be brought in?
No, I have everything I need. It's impossible. And here. So, horrible man. Just don't think about it. It's going to be a lovely Christmas tree. I'll do anything you want, Told. I'll sing for you. I'll dance. You're back already.
Yes. Has anyone been here?
Here? No.
Oh, it's funny. I saw Krogstad leaving the building.
Really? Oh, yes, he was here for a minute.
Nora, he was here begging you to put in a good word for him, wasn't he? I can tell just by looking at you.
Yes.
And you weren't going to tell me that he'd been here. You were going to pretend that it was your idea. Was that his suggestion as well?
Yes, Told.
Nora, how could you agree to something like that? How could you talk to that sort of man, let alone make promises to him, and then to lie to me on top of everything?
What?
Yes, you told me he hadn't been here, didn't you? Now, my songbird must never do that again. The songbird must have a clean beak, mustn't she? She mustn't sing out of tune, isn't that right? Yes, I thought so. Well, we'll say no more about it. Isn't it warm and cozy here?
Torvald,
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to the Steinberg's fancy dress ball.
And I'm dying to see what you're going to surprise me with this time.
Well, it's just so silly.
What is it?
I can't think of anything good. Everything I think of seems so stupid and pointless.
Oh, you found that out, have you, Nora, dear?
Are you very busy?
Well,
What are all those papers?
that's to do with the bank.
Already?
Yes, I've persuaded the outgoing manager to give me the authority to make the necessary staff and administrative changes. I want to do that during Christmas week. I want it all settled by the new year.
That's why Paul Krogstad was.
Hmm?
Well, if you weren't so busy, I was going to ask you for an enormous favor.
Oh, what might that be? Tell me.
Well, your taste is better than anyone's, and I do so want to look nice at the fancy dress ball, and I was thinking, well, couldn't you just take charge of me, Torvald, tell me what to be and what sort of costume to wear?
What? A stubborn little girl like you appealing for a savior?
I'll never be able to manage without your help.
All right. Good. I'll think about it. See what we can come up with.
Very kind. these red flowers for you? Torvald,
Yes.
was what Krogstad did really so wrong?
Forgery. Have you any idea how serious that is?
But isn't it possible that he was forced into it out of necessity?
Yes, or else he did it without thinking, like so many people. I'm not so heartless as to condemn a man irrevocably because of one isolated incident.
Oh, I know you're not.
Man
Torvald.
can always regain his moral stature if he openly confesses his crime and takes his punishment.
It's punishment.
Yes. Forgery is punishable by imprisonment. That wasn't Krogstad's method. He got out of it by trickery and deceit. That's what makes him morally degenerate.
But don't you think...
Think of the way a man with a guilty conscience has to live. Lies, hypocrisy, pretense. Why, even those closest to him, even his wife and children, can never see behind his mask. The most dreadful thing about it is what happens to the children.
Why?
Oh, dear, because an atmosphere of lies and deceit can infect the whole life of a home. Why, every breath a child takes in a home like that is full of infection.
Are you sure about that, Torvald?
Dear, as a lawyer, I've had more than enough experience of that sort of thing. Why, do you know, Nora, that nearly all young criminals have had dishonest mothers?
Why do you say mothers?
Well, because the mother usually spends the most time with them, that's why. Although, of course, the father can have the same effect. Yet Krogstad has gone on living at home all these years, poisoning his own children with lies and deceit. That's why I say he's morally crippled. And that is why my dear little Nora has promised me never to mention his name again. She can't. Come, what is this? Take my hand. There. Now, it's settled in. Huh? Anyway, it would have been quite impossible for me to work with Krogstad at the bank, I can tell you. People like that literally make me feel physically ill.
Warm in here. I've got so much to do.
Oh, yes. Yes, and I really should get through some of these papers before lunch. And, you know, I'll think about your costume as well. And I might even find a little something to wrap up in gold paper and hang on the Christmas tree. Oh, jolly little songbird.
It's not true. It's impossible. It must be impossible.
The children want to know if they can come and play with their mummy.
No, you mustn't let them in. Just keep them with you, Emmy.
Mommy.
Not my children.